All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sebas. I'm a customer success manager here at Lab Simplified. I'll be co-hosting this webinar today. We are so excited to have you join us for today's webinar on laboratory competency assessments, how to get it done. And before I go any further, let's do a quick check-in. Please drop a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay, I see a couple of thumbs up here. Thank you so much for confirming that. We have a good crowd here today. A lot of people signed up for this webinar. So we'll give them a couple of minutes for them to join before we start the presentation. And while we're waiting for everyone to join, I'd like to quickly go over some pointers for this webinar. One of the questions that we often get is this webinar recorded? Yes, it will be recorded, and once the webinar is over, we will send you the details on how and where you can access them. If you experience any buffering issues, please try closing the other apps that are running in your device. That usually helps. And for the Q&A session, you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to ask your questions. Please submit your question in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer them during the presentation. If our time allows, we have a lot to go over today. So if we didn't get time to answer your questions, we'll make sure that we will send those answers in your inbox. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions in the Q&A sections. And we'll also be running some polls during the presentation. So please pay attention to the interaction section of the webinar. And once the webinar is over, you will see an evaluation form at the end. We really encourage you to participate in that because your feedback will help us improve in the future webinars. So I really appreciate it if you guys could fill those out. And I would like to mention briefly about our sponsor today, Lab Simplified. So I don't know if you guys know, but Lab Simplified is an inventory management software built specifically for labs. And there are many generic solutions out there which are not built to solve the unique challenges the labs face every day. Most laboratories still manages their inventory with spreadsheets, which can cost your lab thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours in lost productivity and waste. And that is where Lab Simplified comes in. Lab Simplified helps you stay organized, reduce cost, and maintain compliance. So if you all are looking to improve your inventory management and compliance, please go to our website and to learn more and also to request a demo. Okay. And this is our first of our educational webinar series. We are really excited to bring you valuable insights and look forward to hosting more webinars in the future to support laboratories. So please follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website for any updates. And thank you again for joining us. And we chose the competency assessment as our topic for this webinar. And the reason why we chose this topic is, competency assessments are such an important topic for lab professionals. It's not just regulatory requirements, but also very essential in maintaining a high quality operation, ensuring compliance, and ultimately delivering the accurate patient results. And yet, competency evaluation remains one of the most cited areas during the inspection. And that is why we're here today, to dive in the whys and hows and who's of the competency assessments. And we'll try to give you some knowledge and guidelines on how to build a strong and compliant program in your lab. And having said that, I'm excited to announce our speaker today, Dr. Darryl Elzie. Dr. Little bio on him. Dr. Elzie is an ASCP medical laboratory scientist with over 3 decades of expertise in lab inspection is a certified quality auditor and a lab inspector for the CAP. He serves as the director of the Virginia State chapter of the ASCP and is the manager of regulatory affairs at Innova Blood Donor Services. And with his decades of diverse healthcare experience, he advises and consults at Lab Simplified. Dr. Elzie holds a doctorate in psychology from the University of Rockies and Master of Healthcare Administration from Ashford University. And beyond his current role, he practices as a psychologist, life coach, and a counselor at issuelifecoaching.com, leveraging his diverse background to support personal and professional growth. Now, with that, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Dr. Elzie, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Subhash, for that introduction. And I wanted to right now thank Lab Simplified for approaching me to sponsor this educational seminar dealing with competency. As you mentioned earlier, that competency across all 7 accrediting organizations, year after year, it is competency, the most frequently cited deficiency. As a matter of fact, last night I was teaching some ASCP international students, and we dealt with competency. It was surprising here on an international level, they're using those same CLIA 88 competency 6 elements as the basis for doing competency across laboratories around the world. That was surprising and is working for them also, but also they have the same type of challenges. So we're going to talk about laboratory competency. Hopefully I can break it down. If you have any questions, please send them to Subhash. I'm going to try to get them in there. I know some of this, when I do competency, write about competency, I always generate questions because it can become complicated. I'm going to share with you some of the things that will hopefully make it a smoother. And we wanted to do this seminar here at the beginning of the year because you should start competency now. To be successful in competency, you must have it organized. So to get the organization, you need to start at the beginning of the year, because we're going to talk about some of the caveats as we move along. We're going to talk about the semi-annual, or what we know as a 6 months competency. And so to get a handle on that, you should start that at the beginning of the year and plan out how you're going to get it done. So, and I usually suggest people by the end of November, have that your date to have everybody's competency completed, because of course when December comes, you have a lot of people out for different reasons. So let's move on. So what are we going to talk about? Well, our objectives today, we're going to try to understand why competency is required. First, we're going to get that as our foundation. Why we got to do competency. We want to talk about the quality thing. And I've already warned you, quality is really my thing. I've asked Subhash to reel me back in because I can really get on that pedestal to talk about quality, because it's so important. It's integral in having great patient care and contributing to that healthcare delivery paradigm that the laboratory plays. And so quality should be integrated at every level in your laboratory. So I constantly come back to that. And we're going to talk about how competency is integrated in that and plays an important role. Next, understand who is allowed to perform competency. That is an important thing. There was some changes last year. Congress had done some things, or approved some things that came out of the agency. So it's opened the door for some of our laboratory workers, especially for our MOTs. And we're going to talk about how they can have a greater role in the laboratory, and competency is a part of that. And then become familiar with the 6 elements of competency. 6 elements of non-waived testing. That is the important thing. If you have non-waived testing going on in your laboratory, you must do all 6 elements. And we're going to talk about that, how to get those done with and some of the nuances around making sure you have all 6 elements covered. And then those instances where the hopefully rare instances where a competency element may not apply to a test system. And number 4 here, understand the required frequency of semi-annual and annual competency. I had already mentioned that earlier about making sure that timing, especially for the semi-annual competency, is so important to get that done on time. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to make that work for you. Semi-annual competencies have to be done on all your new hires. We're going to talk about when does that clock start and when is that when it's due. And if you think about it, when I show you, it's pretty simple. It's just that you have to have it organized. And also, and we're mentioning how your staff should be involved. Those new hires should be involved in reminding you, hey, it's time for my competency. So why do we do competency? Here, according to the CDC, as of November, and we mentioned this earlier, 2023, across the 7 independent clinical laboratory accrediting organizations and CMS surveyors, the most frequently cited deficiency was, competency evaluation. It does not matter what organization that you have coming in there to either inspect you, do the accreditation, or if it's CMS, if it's the feds themselves, it always comes back to competency. And that is the exact reason why when I was approached by Lab Simplified, I said, hey, let's talk about competency now and help our laboratories across the country to tackle this beast that keeps giving us this issue. So first, what is competence? Competence is the application of knowledge and skills and behaviors and performance. And what's the important thing here? What is the important? It's here, the application. That means the actual doing the work. How do you apply all those knowledge, skills, and behaviors that this individual has brought to you, or who is in your laboratory to perform those patient tests? How do they do it? Those SOPs, those are what we're talking about. How do they follow those SOPs per as they're written? Because one of the things I always talk about, we have in laboratories, what we call human drift. You know, we learn these shortcuts and workarounds that are not per SOP, and that's usually where we get in trouble. So we do competence to make sure everyone has the skill, the knowledge, and they're applying it correctly. So why do we assess competency? Many of us know we assess the competency of testing personnel to ensure they have the skill, knowledge, and experience to perform their laboratory duties correctly. And also why? Because it's a federal regulation. Absolutely correct. CMS, Medicare, Medicaid are the biggest payer of our healthcare costs. And so we want to make sure that we meet all those standards so that we do not get cut off. If you want to see a hospital administration, hair catch on fire, talk about the feds show up, or we are at risk because of findings of an inspection. That can become a very intense situation. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Who can assess competency of non-waived testing? Here's the tip. Responsibility of competency must be delegated in writing by the laboratory medical director. Right at the beginning, you have to have that letter. This is one of the things I ask for when I go do an inspection. I have to have a written delegation. We're going to talk about, you have the medical director, but then you have all these other staff that, as in the CFR, or these positions, technical consultant, you have the technical supervisors, you have the general supervisor. Those roles have to be delegated. It has to be delegated in writing. Usually, when you write that delegation, you should not put any names there. You should just put positions. And we're going to talk about where those positions go and why you want to do it like that later on. But you really should have that written delegation. And I believe it's a CAP standard also. They're going to ask, the inspector should ask to see that. Here, we're talking about right here, CMS 209 form. When we talk about CLIA roles, you see there in the middle, there's a director, clinical consultant, technical supervisor, general supervisor, testing personnel, and then you can see the psychologist there. And then you have the M and the H over there, talk about moderate or high complexity testing. All of this is about non-waived testing. We're going to refer to these as we move on. If you've ever been inspected by any of the federal authorities, CMS or FDA, they'll maybe ask you to fill this out. And then this is what they do the inspection from, where when they go and look at, you look at who's doing the assessment, do they have the educational and experience requirements. This is a very important form that you should keep up to date as much as possible. So what are we talking about? 2 types of non-waived testing. Well, we know there are also 2 types of testing. You have waived and non-waived. What is waived testing? Waived testing is a test, usually a home-based test that you can do at home, pregnancy test, and a little strep test, COVID test now. They have a waived testing. You know, the FDA determines, they have a criterion where they determine which, looking at the complexity of the test, is it a waived or non-waived? Usually the waived testing ones that you can do, anyone can do at home. What we're concerned about in the laboratory are non-waived testing. Even though in many laboratories they do have some wave testing. Pregnancy test is a popular one they have in the laboratory use, and you should do competency on that also. But we're talking about non-wave testing because there's some caveats here on the 2 types of non-wave testing. You have moderate complexity testing, That's most automated platforms include some provider perform microscopy tests, urine, skin scraping, excretions, KOH. Then you also have the high complexity testing. These are usually tests that require some type of sample manipulation. Here you need to be very careful on which one is moderate and which one is high, simply because when you're doing your assessment, because of the skill level that was required previously, even though I mentioned earlier, there's been some changes. We're going to talk about that because we talk about hematology. You got an automated hematology instrument. True, well, hematology, that's going to be moderate complexity. Most automation are, but if you do manual deals, well, then now that test is a high complexity test. So therefore, just to get this one CBC and diff out, I have a CBC, let's say a manual deal, where I'm using a moderate complexity and a high complexity test. Historically, that causes some issues. And I think with the changes that the CMS come out for assessing personnel and responsibilities, there may be some made it a little bit easier in the laboratory. And we're going to talk about why here shortly. And then if you're not sure, you can always check the FDA CLIA database. They have a database, you can go there. They have all the test lists and will tell you if they're high or moderate complexity. Most vendors, when they're have it in their literature, how the complexity type of their test. If they're waived tests, they're very proud to let you know that it's a waived test because they know that's easy to bring on board and requires no in-depth training. It's not required. Competency is not required by the federal government, even though I'm always encouraging, even on waived testing in the laboratory, that you do perform competency. And there's that. So let's look for the moderate complexity testing. What do you, how do you qualify to that? So per CLIA regulation, assessors must qualify as a technical consultant having a bachelor's degree in chemical, physical, biological science, or clinical laboratory science. And I want to add to that also nursing, even though that's not written in there. That's why nursing used to be, could be over labs, usually a lot of times in doctor's offices or small labs. But this is a change I was telling you about. As of December 28th of just last year, individuals who have an associate degree in medical laboratory technology, medical laboratory science, or clinical laboratory science and have at least 4 years of laboratory training or experience in non-waived testing in the designated specialty or subspecialty areas of service may qualify as technical consultant. Two things here when they say non-waived testing and designated specialty or subspecialty. Usually that's okay if the person is a generalist where you do all the tests in the laboratory, urine, blood bank, chemistry. If you're a generalist, all of that you can have simultaneously gaining that experience. This is a big deal here. Because before, one of the problems were MLTs. There used to be a lot of resentment there. MLT, where we were performing a test, but per federal regulations, they could not qualify to assess moderate complexity testing. You had to have a bachelor's degree, point blank. There was no ambiguity there. And then you need to check all the experience and training. Now with this change, you can have MOTs in charge of these programs. There are like 9 different categories of responsibilities of the technical consultant. This is a big deal because, especially for smaller labs or laboratories who are really only the thing they do moderate complexity testing, this is important for point of care testing. You have point of care testing that's non-waived. Now the MOTs have a way to move up and become administrative because they can assess and not only just assess competency, they can be completely over that section. They qualify as a technical consultant, which they're talking about selection of PT, administrative proficiency testing program, all the things that are under that caveat for a technical consultant. Now, MLT can have that. It's now qualified. I was very happy to see that happen because that was an area. It seems like the MLTs who are very qualified are sitting right next to the bachelor's degree tech or the technologist and saying that, well, I can't move anywhere because without that bachelor's degree, and even though they can do the testing and they understand the science behind it. The caveat here is not the associate's degree has to be in medical laboratory technology and clinical laboratory science. What they did, and I commend the CMS, they listened to all the comments during the comment period. And so now nursing, they removed that ability of nursing to be over those programs, unless they can show that that person has all the laboratory or clinical science background, the quality background necessary to successfully run the program. This is a transition. I know some people may feel that who's been doing it, the nurses over program. But one of the things I used to do as a quality coordinator is that anytime I had a diploma from maybe a bachelor's degree in a Squarely, sometimes you get a Bachelor of Arts in a science or a BS in an art major, I would send those things to CMS, to regional office, to the state or the regional office, and let them give the final say so on is this person qualified. And what they do, they will look at the college transcript, look how many clinical laboratory classes they had, how many hours of that, and they will send back a determination. But this is a big change here for those of us who are in the clinical lab and have all different levels of personnel working in the laboratory. And as I said, this means that MOTs may now qualify as a technical consultant. That is a very good thing. I'm happy for our colleagues to have this additional way to move up in the laboratory administration. High complexity testing. There's a change there too. Per CLIA regulations, assessors must qualify as a technical supervisor to perform semi-annual competency. This is a regulation here. If you look under the technical supervisor, we talked about the delegation in the CFR. It does not say you can delegate the semi-annual competency, but however, this statute here has not really been enforced. Most inspectors, even CMS inspectors, were just looking to making sure that the semi-annual competency was done, even if that assessment, the final assessment, was done by what we call a general supervisor. And per CLIA regulation, assessors must qualify as a general supervisors to perform an annual competency. And the general supervisor, as you know, for high complexity testing, those of us who are in working blood bank, that all immunohematology, aka known as blood bank, is high complexity molecular testing, high complexity test. That was a route that you had many MOTs working there. They could perform annual competency assessment, but that's the only thing they could do. There are other things that they were not qualified. They're still not qualified in high complexity lab, but they have that option because so much is becoming automated, as I mentioned earlier, for the technical consultant to be move up in laboratory administration. This is the big change that happened here. Immunohematology, also known as our favorite blood bank, as of December 28, technical supervisor, high complexity immunohematology laboratories have been modified such that aligns with the requirements for a technical supervisor on the high complexity testing, such that you can go to minimum of a bachelor's degree, and then there's the 4 years requirement. So you have to have 4 years of laboratory training or experience in high complexity testing for immunohematology. Previously, you used to have a MD or DO, a doctor, over as the technical supervisor. That really can add some complexity, especially to big labs, because the competency, the semi-annual competency that wasn't really enforced, but all those other things that go on. If you have the pathologist who is also going to fill in the role of the technical supervisor, that means the administration of the proficiency testing program and all the other things that a technical supervisor has to go through his or her office. That's more work for them. In addition to the other duties in maintaining the clinical laboratory. Open this up to our techs who have the 4 years experience and a bachelor's degree. Takes a big load off of them now that they can be over blood bank. There's a lot of things in there that they're qualified. So this is a big help also for blood banks, such that now some of the all the things that the paperwork and the signatures don't have to go higher, as long as the technical supervisor signs them off. That caveat being said, ultimately, you have to go back to a few slides when I say all of this has to be delegated, and it does not relieve the medical director of the responsibility of the laboratory. Always remember the buck stops with the medical director, so you should keep them apprised of what's going on. But as far as meeting the standards and the regulations of the federal government, this right here is a big change, and it should give you some flexibility in the laboratory as we move forward. So let's move. We talked about the personnel part. So let's competency. That's why you're here today. You want to learn how to get it done. So let's go there. CLIA requires 6 elements of competency to be assessed for non-waived testing. That's absolutely right. And any inspector, no matter whether it's Joint Commission, CAP, AABB, if it's the FDA, I'm over a Blood Donor Service Center. We have CMS, AABB, FBA, all of CLIA come in to, it seems like I'm always getting inspected. This right here, they're all on the same page about that. They're going to look for all 6 elements, and we're going to talk about how you get those done. First one is direct observation and routine test performance. Monitoring the recording and reporting of test results. That includes criticals, review of immediate test results, worksheets, QC, preventive maintenance records, direct observation of instrument function or maintenance check. Notice that 1 and 4 is direct observation. That means you just can't review previously analyzed test results. You have to be there. You have to be an assessor. That assessor has to actually see that person, a qualified assessor, see and perform those tests. 1 and 4, that's part of those 6 elements. You have to think about how you're going to get that done. 5, proficiency testing on blind samples. You'll see proficiency testing is very few places that get enough proficiency testing to cover all testing personnel. So you know that many of them use blind samples. The caveat with blind samples, why? You have to properly evaluate it. You cannot just give them a previous analyzed sample and have them run it and just throw that in the packet or however you keep your record keeping. You need to evaluate that. What many places do, they use plus or minus of the PT, whether it's a CAP or API or Welsh or whoever you use, whatever that's SD, and say, well, it needs to be this close, and you need to have on that evaluation that it is acceptable. Do the whole thing on those blind samples. But blind samples are a great way to do it instead of waiting on the proficiency test to come in and get it done. Go back to what I tell you at the beginning, be organized. You can plan that out through the year, especially those laboratories are performing those rare tests or esoteric tests that you really cannot group together, that you only have a few PT samples through the year. Think about how you're going to get that done. All the people who are performing that test, how are you going to make that happen? Especially if you come across a rare test and it's positive, that's a great one to save and aliquot out and say, hey, I can use this to get my competency done. Think about that here now at the beginning of the year. And then finally, problem-solving skills. Problem-solving skills. What are we talking about? Well, we're not talking about, well, the instrument broke down, I called tech services. That is not a problem. You haven't solved a problem. You just made a phone call. Problem-solving skills. If you want to go that route, as far as troubleshooting, you need to be able to have that documented. What happened? What do you do? There has some complexity to it to solve that issue, and then that you got the outcome that you got the instrument back working or you solve the problem. That is a little subjective because between one inspector to the next inspector, it's like, well, that doesn't seem like a big problem. What most people do, so they can get away from that ambiguity, they just do a test. And I always recommend, let's do a test where we have a test. We can do one big test. If you're in a medium-sized or small laboratory that covers all the testing, or you can do if you're in a department, have a test that covers all your testing platforms or assays that you have there. And then the going thing is that most people use 80% because I know CAP, most of the acceptable scores are 80% or better, and that's what you do for 80%. That is the easiest way to get it done. And then you have this the basic test, and you can switch up questions as you go from year to year. Many organizations have an electronic method of doing that. There is software out there that will scramble the answers or scramble the questions to get it done. What you have to do, you have to be able to explain that to an inspector. This is how we do competency. This is how we get it done each and every time, and be prepared to answer those questions when they ask, well, how you do this, how do you do that, and say here, because what an inspector is looking at, you want to make sure that you're meeting the regulation, that you have a good handle on your competency program, because it is so very important. Why? Because it's one we always get hung up on. So how do you complete an annual competency assessment chart? Now, I got this from the CAP. The CAP, I've done many inspections for them. This is the easy one. It's off of a spreadsheet. They make it available. I'm sure Joint Commission, other accrediting organizations have different tools, but this is the basis because this is just one example. And because it covers and shows you everything, it's all 6 elements there. So let's dive a little deeper. Here's the employee name. Of course, you got to have the assessment year. Further down, this is the key area here. As you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 are on the side. So you can say right here what we're addressing, which element. It is important to not have any blank spaces in a completed form. NAs may be used, but the assessor must know why the NA is used and must be able to explain why the element does not apply to the testing personnel. That is so important right there. When I'm looking at competency assessment form, blank spaces is just like a neon sign. I'm gonna go straight there because I'm like, ask you, well, why? Why is that a blank space? Usually you have all 6 elements are there. There are some rare cases. I know in big labs, I did an inspection where they said that this person works on second shift. They don't do quality control. Okay. I said they never do quality control, especially the instrument go down. Nope, they're not responsible for it. So what I would do, you put on my inspector hat now. So I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna ask to pull, see like 3 months of schedule. That person's never had to work on a different shift. They've always stayed there. And that's what we do. We go back and look to make sure, because QC, and we all know QC is so important. Everybody should know how to do QC because the instruments break all the time. If you get it back up, what do you have to do to get it running? You got to do quality control. So we can all agree that you should know how to do quality control and then also how to evaluate it. That means all of these should have some type of should be filled in. One of the things that you can see, number 2, I have here is reporting criticals. Now that one may not apply because the KOH, you're not gonna have a critical on that, right? You won't have critical on all the tests performed in the lab, and that's okay. And usually, what on reporting criticals, you can say there, well, many places now in your LIS or HIS, they have the software. It's the same a CAN text statement that's done because what we're and know it's a CAP standard also that we make sure that you do a readback. All the accredited organizations do that you do a readback. So that's a CAN statement. So usually when I see one critical or that they've done, we're satisfied because again, as an inspector, we're not there to we should not be there to come to get you as per se or find something for you. I'm coming as an inspector, make sure you're running a great lab to deliver great patient outcomes. You're doing those results accurately. I'm not expecting perfection, so we're going to be reasonable as we're doing that inspection. And when we're going through this by competency, we're going to have a discussion. Especially if I had seen blank spaces, well, you need to have an explanation right there. And I would say I recommend not to put a blank space, definitely don't have any blank space, but also having an explanation on an NA, because I won't ask you, well, you NA this, why is that NA? And so you should be ready for that question. So further, what information we're here, as you can see, I got the cobots here. You put the date and tech. A lot of the stuff here, as you can see, this is an easy form. You just put the evidence that is there, the date, and many times they will use the specimen ID because why I see that, what usually happen, I will ask, well, I'm gonna do a tracer. Let me get one and pull it. I will ask you to go, you accompany me and make sure you have the evidence of all of this.
Dr. Elzie, sorry to interrupt you here, but we have a question here, and it relates to this slide. Asan asked, can we discuss the test system? What qualifies as a test system for a competency assessment?
Great question. What qualifies? Usually tested, the easy ones are like in chemistry. Those are very easy, right? Because it's on the instrument platform. So you can say, here's, as I got here, I got the cobas, or hematology, I got the Sysmex sitting there. Those are easy ones. Those are what you don't have to do a test system for, like a sodium each test. No, it's the same movement, and especially those that are automated because those are moderate complexity tests. You throw a tube on, there's no sample manipulation. Those are test system. Where it gets kind of squirrely, kind of crazy is like when you like go to micro, you go to kit testing. Those you have to look at each one because some they allow you to group them together. We have a lot of kit tests now. We have some instrumentation that does RSV, flu, and COVID at the same time. That's one test system right there. And that's what I would say. That's one test system. There's no different sample manipulation or sample handling for that one test system. There are some kits out there that here still is just a swab. When you do the same thing, then it's a colorimetric test. It's going to show up positive and negative. That is something you need to discuss. Is there anything that's sort of an ambiguity, you're not sure about it, you need to discuss with your medical director, because he or she is responsible for the laboratory. If you want to group some tests together and say, hey, this is a test system, nothing changes, that is fine. So simple, quick answer is usually test platforms, you have one big modular or whatever, that's just one test system. Other things you have to take a look at, blood bank, that's another area that gets a little squirrely there. There's a lot going over in blood bank. You have to look at that, because usually if there's some different sample manipulation there or processes, you're going to need to have that as a separate assay. And be prepared, if you do group some together, to talk about why those are that group. We feel that should be just one assay. We can group them all together. I know there are some expensive tests out there, like fetal fibronectin is a very expensive test, but then you really can't too much group it with any other test. It still is a non-wave test. You have to do competency assessment. There are some that I've talked to CMS and CAP where they can use a representative, so you don't have to use a fresh cartridge. Can use the QC material. That is a conversation you need to talk with your medical director, so you can have an inspector come. You can explain why there's a high cost if you want to do a fresh test every time to do the competency. Sometimes that's unreasonable. Some tests can get up to $1,000 per test. So, but be prepared to explain it. As I mentioned earlier, a good inspector is not there to try to catch you on something. They want to understand that, hey, you are assured that your staff is doing competency and they know what they're doing. You understand why. Okay, we use a simulated test sample here to do this test here because it's a high cost. The staff goes through every step per SOP to get here, even though it's a simulated sample. I'm okay with that. Then I can understand that. Be prepared for that explanation and talk about it. And even if you have that one inspector that was hard to budge, you can always challenge it. Happy to challenge that in taking it to speak about the CAP or any of the accrediting bodies. They are very understanding, and they will listen to you and give you a fair hearing if you feel it's an unfair citation or deficiency. So I hope I've answered your question. That's a good question.
Thank you, Dr. Quickly, I want to mention to our audience that Dr. Elzie has written a great blog on a guide to competency assessments, and it's published in our website. And I will post the link to that blog here in the chat section if anyone is interested. And there are also a lot of other useful blogs in that platform. So let me post the link there in the chat section. So please refer to that blog.
Yeah. There's some good stuff there. And also, I'm always available. You can reach me at Lab Simplify. I have it at EM. I see time is moving on. I told you Subash to pull me in when I start talking here. So we got quite a few more slides to go. But competency, I want our listeners to get this down, because competency, it can be very challenging if you're not organized and you don't got a good handle on it. Here, as you see, as we're moving on, looking at the screen, it's about you documenting everything. What do you have here? You have the date here, and then you have the initial of the assessor, and when it was done, the blind samples, and here down at the bottom, you have the problem solving, you have the test score. All of this, as an inspector, if you're using this sheet or some other sheet like this is organized, I am usually okay. Sometimes. If I feel that there's something going on, well, let me do a deep dive. Let me see the actual evidence, because as an inspector, when I come there, many times, unless it's a system, I got one day in your facilities, I can't do too much. I need to get an overall impression on that. So if you have this all filled out, I will pull one, check the assessor, make sure that the assessor is qualified to do the assessment. And you've gotten all your record keeping and your documentation here. We're pretty good to go. But I'm gonna tell you from being experienced, I've been inspected by CMS, and they've been there for 3 weeks. FDA, if they come in for 3 weeks, and they'll sit there and they'll go through every piece of paper it asks you to document. You need to have that backed up and ready to produce if you're gonna do just these use a spreadsheet and just have these notations like this. So here's a helpful tip: assessment periods for annual competency. Here, just an example. There are a whole lot of different labs across the great country of America. You can do all different types of things going on. But I highly recommend that you split it up. If you got a big lab, you have a bunch of journalists, they're working everywhere. Split up have assessment periods for annual competency, especially if you got a journalist, you got big labs. Well, you don't want them doing the competency at in blood bank at the same time in hematology. They get kind of crazy, especially if if you're sharing your senior techs or the people who are responsible. Define you some competency periods. Get you some so it'll be organized. And this is just an example here of how you can have more. You can have molecular, and don't forget about if you're responsible for blood gas or respiratory therapy. And that's another thing I hadn't mentioned about that point of care nursing. Point of care, that's a challenge to get that done. You're dealing with nurses. We've all known laboratorians, nursing and laboratorians speak a different language, but it's so very important if they're using some point of care devices like iStat in the ER, they're using point of care devices that are moderate complexity testing, they have to have their competency done. It's just like in the lab, you have to have the semi-annual competency. You have to work with them. You have to be organized. You need to get it together. If it's a smaller lab uses one quality person, might have to be responsible for it. What I'm finding, as I mentioned earlier, that's what a great thing about now that MLTs can qualify as a technical consultant. They can be over a point of care testing program. I highly recommend that because they've had that clinical laboratory background science. One of the things, caveat with that is that they need to know there's dealing with a different population of people and workers, because nurses have to talk nursing language and help them get there. So that one-on-one personnel talk, they need to have that skill also, that people skill also, so that they can get them on board, so that they can understand why they do what they do and how to do it. Here's another tip, suggestion for making the deadline for completion of competency around November 30th. I found that works. As I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be doing competency in December. Too much good stuff going on. You have the holidays and people, they have vacations, all those things going on. And you have your deadline for completion of competency. What I mean by deadline, that means everything is done. I mean, it's signed. It's all, you're not waiting for PT. Well, I got a PT coming in December. That's the one. You should be able to plan that now. Start your planning now. So November 30th, you can say a sigh of relief and say, I am done. Everybody's done. I've got it all signed. I am good to go. So therefore, December, going into the new year, you can have that breathing space right there. That is so important. And what I'm sharing with you right now is life experience. I've seen it over and over again, smaller as well as larger lab. Get that deadline and stick to it yourself. If you get your team, if there's a team of you who are assessors, say, this is what we need to do. We need to have it done, signed off in the folders, if it's electronic scan, so that's there, that competency is done. That is really helps in having a great life in the laboratory. Another tip, have the employee be responsible for providing some of the evidence to complete the competency form, and the assessor just documents the evidence is appropriate and meets the requirements of the competency element. Remember, what do we have to have direct observation on? 1 and 4. So you got 2 and 3 that, hey, here's the test. I did this test. Here's the evidence. Scan it in, or however you using your record keeping. Get the staff involved. Say, hey, you got your competency done. These are the things. Give them what they need to them, and have them collected. Have them presented to you. As an assessor, you just make sure that it's qualified. You do the back work. 1 and 4. That means you need to work with your timing. How you can get out there and look at them when they're performing the test, when they're working on the analyzer. Hey, when they're in micro and they have to do the gram stain, which is a very manual one. And it's very important to do that. That direct observation, I know sometimes we like to blow it off, but it is so important to sit there and watch a person do a test. You'd be surprised at things that you may see that someone does, and you ask them, well, why did you do that? Well, such and such told me that, or I learned this. Nope. If it's not following the SOP, you cannot accept that. You always have to be by the SOP. Always, again, be by the SOP. That is why you need to sit there and you need to watch them as they perform tests. Don't blow that off. Number five is one that you're in control of. That's the blind samples, proficiency testing. You should be able to plan that out. You know how many employees you got. Plan that out ahead of time so that you can hit all of them. And then number 6, as I mentioned, highly recommend make a test. Take your time, make a test, cover a couple questions of all your test system, get them together, and to administer that to your staff. Organization, that's the key thing here on getting competency done, and be ready for that inspector when they come and they challenge you and say, hey, what you doing here? And you're like, hey, I got this. Documents supporting competency items may be kept in a separate accessible file. Those of us who are still manual, still doing the paper thing, as an inspector, when I come, if you're using that form or some other form, similar form, those are the ones I mentioned earlier I'm going to look at, making sure you dot all the I's. I really don't need that big packet of employee documents, competency throughout the year. What I will look, and the reason why, because I got to look at forms, I got to look at the education, the resume, those types of things. But for competency, because all of that, if you want to keep those documents in a separate file and just have that 1 sheet or 2 sheets, whatever it is, somewhere else, and just show that, and then say, if you want to do a deeper dive on that employee, I can bring in that file. That is a great way, or another way, for you to have your documents in ready for an inspection. This is it right here, new hires. This is the one we get tripped on so many times. Competency must be assessed semi-annually during the first year of patient testing. That's right, semi-annually. We say semi-annually, that multi-syllable word, but most of us in the lab say that's 6 months competency, right? You have to have that done, right? When does it start? The clock starts when the new hire performs patient testing after training. Again, I like that. Training. Do not get training confused with competency. Those are 2 different things. Do not switch those words out. Training and competency is 2 different things. And I got some scenarios, so I want to get on my pedestal here about that. Remember that first bullet up there that says competency must be assessed semi-annually during the first year of patient testing. Not training itself may encompass and may have some testing involved in it. That's what CLSI tells you that, yeah, testing is part of that training. The clock didn't start then. The clock starts after training. That means after you sign them off, whether if it's just, many places, especially the smaller labs or even busy labs, you need to get somebody on staff. They'll throw you in urinalysis because that's the easiest one, and get them signed off. That's when the clock starts. And so we're going to come to the scenario because that's where I'm about to go about how that works out. But it's important on documenting when that person has finished training, not finished training in all the departments. Usually it doesn't work like that, but finished training and you release them to the prairie on that department that they can do all the urines. Well, the clock started right there. And then the new hire competency must cover all test systems the employee is using to release patient test results at the time the competency is required. So right there, so let me tell you about that. What we're saying, so you get there, when that person, we was talking about urines, they started testing right then. We got them through there. They were wonderful. It was a superhero type tech. It only took a day for them to get them. They read their SOPs and they went in there and they did the urine. So you had a small urine department. They got it done. You sign them off. You put them on the staff. Okay, that clock started, right? They still have to train in hematology, chemistry, and all that. True, that's going to happen. But that's the first thing that's going to be when the first 6 months competency come. If the urine's going to be on there and anything place else, whether it's chemistry, hematology, if they're finished training in there and they are doing patient testing unobserved, they're free to do their thing. When that 6 months competency starts, which you already knew because at the end of urine, when you train them, they started working free. That's when those next 2 dates. Okay, they started here, 6 months later here, then 6 months later after that, that's the second 6 months competency. You shouldn't know that early. Matter of fact, at that time, you should inform the new hire and say, hey, wherever you at in your journey here in labs and training, these are the 2 dates that are going to be important to you, is here, 6 months later, and here. Help me make sure that I do your competency. We have now we have electronic tools. I suggest you go on your calendar and you place those dates there so that you know the 6 months competency. Here I have the template here, 6-month competency assessment. You use the same, it is no difference. Only thing different with the new hires are you have to do it 6 months after they started patient testing, then another 6 months after that. So here's a helpful scenario. So Bob gets hired in February 25 and begins training. Bob finished training year analysis in February 28th and put on the schedule on March 1st to work in the bench every other weekend. Bob also begins and finished hematology training in April. On September of 2025, Bob is training in chemistry, but still works in the UA hematology benches. That first 6 months competency for Bob here is due on September the 25th and must include all test systems he has been trained on and is using to perform patient testing, which is UA and hematology. Even though he's still training in chemistry, he is not signed off in chemistry. Only UA and hematology is due at September. Now, next in March 26th, which will be next month coming up, that second 6 month competency would include all the test system Bob has been trained in and is used to perform patient testing. So that means UA again, hematology again, then also chemistry and any other system. He's in micro, blood bank, he was able to get all that in, all those. Everything that he's been trained on and performing patient testing at that second 6 months competency is due again. So yes, he did UA and hematology on the first one. He's got to do UA and hematology again on the second 6 months competency. Make sure you do it like that. And note here, because the second 6 months competency is completed in the next year, Bob does not have to perform an annual competency for 2026. That's the only benefit. So that six months here in March, he's done for the year. You don't have to worry about Bob. Bob gets thrown in that other pile of people called regular employees that just do the annual competency. And for the annual competency, you have to remember, you got all year to get that done. So, but those new hires, I repeat again emphatically, treat those new hires differently than you treat the ones annual, because the most frequent thing we get caught up is the timing. Usually I recommend people say, and it has to be in your SOP that when you do your 6 months competency, it's due plus or minus 2 weeks. So that kind of gives you a month to get it in there. And if it's written in your SOP, it doesn't have to be on that exact day, but it has to be written in your SOP. You got a plus or minus 2 weeks. That lets the inspector know that you're in control of your program, you know what it's doing, and you're catching everybody when they're supposed to be. Because why are we doing competency? We want to make sure these new hires, these new people that we have are have learned that those test assays, and they are performing patient testing accurately and reliably. And we know these are new people, new test systems. We want to do this. And this is how you do it and have those two. And that's the framework and the mindset behind having those 2 6 months competency. So great thing. I know I'm going pretty fast. Do we have any questions, Subhash, you want to talk about?
Yes, Dr. Elzie, we have one question here from Pamela Coates. Pamela asks, how do you adjust due dates so everyone is to be completed by a certain month? Example, November, when the higher dates are throughout the year.
Right. So therefore, we kind of conflated it, Pamela. Thanks for asking that. Remember, you got 2 groups. You got your new hires and you got everybody else. Now, everybody else, well, we need to have them completed in November. At least we want to. So that means you got a whole year to get their competency done. Remember, competency elements can be done throughout the year. It's not just one, you can get them all done throughout the year. You can collect that evidence. It is only on that other group, that new hire group, you have those due dates that which, as you mentioned, might be in December. So if that 6 months competency, the second 6 months or the first 6 months competency had to be done in December, that should be the only competency you're doing in December if you're saying that all competency has to be completed by November. So again, I don't want to confuse you, have 2 groups of people. Remember, 2 groups. When you have due dates, it's so important for the 6 months competency on your new hire. They may be in December if you're going to go with the November end date. You can't get around that. You have to do that on those timing. That's by federal regulations. You have to do that. But annual competency, you can collect that evidence all through the year. So that's why I was saying, everybody, you should have your act together by November. It should be ready there at November, especially if you get your staff involved. And I really suggest you get your staff on board with helping you do competency, especially those who have big labs, who have a large test menu. If you got one person responsible for competency, I hope you don't do that. I hope if you got people who are qualified in your laboratories, especially in the big labs who have the degrees in education, you can put them on that CMS 209 form as a technical consultant or a general supervisor, and only for competency. That's the only thing they do. Yes, they fill a clear role, but the clear role, their responsibility is only competency. I always recommend that, so you can get everybody involved in that who's been trained and been working there. If they qualify for a technical consultant or a general supervisor, you need that help, especially in your big lab, possibly a small lab. Even though they don't have that quote unquote the other supervisory responsibility, they can be, as far as the federal government and accrediting body concerns, they can fulfill a clear role. And you're right there. Well, this person, and if I see on CMS 209 form, he's a technical consultant. Yes, but he or she is only responsible for competency. That's that's what you do. That's easy and that's acceptable. And I recommend that you do that. Competency can be overwhelming for one person. Look at your staff. Look who's educated. Look who has the qualification, especially those MOTs. Yes, bring those MOTs. They deserve to share some of this pain on getting that competency done and allow them to get that experience so that they can move up on the administrative ladder. So, Pam, thanks for the question. 2 groups, new hires and then everybody else.
Thank you, Dr. Elzie. And I know we are almost heading towards the end of the webinar, and I think we may have some time to squeeze one more question before we end our presentation. Eunice asks, are there any limitation on what a technologist that has a bachelor's degree but not in the laboratory science, though they may have been trained as a generalist?
Right. So you have to have training experience. Okay, you got a bachelor's degree. Remember I mentioned earlier, and I've seen this, that I have people who have bachelor's of arts degree in science or a bachelor of science degree in art. So what does the CFR, what does the Fed say? You got to have a bachelor's degree. So then you look at, we've asked people to bring their transcripts. So you have to look on there and look at the transcript and see how many hours. And then if you look in the CFR, they'll tell you a lot more, especially for testing personnel, how many hours you're supposed to have. Things that I was unsure of, or how I may have had questions. And this happened one time at a place I was working with. I had 800 employees. I had to review every employee folders for a big change. I think that was back in 2016 and 17 when the CAP kind of aligned all of their positions with CLIA. Everybody aligned with CLIA at that time. So we did this big review. If you have those little squirrely degrees and people, you need to take a look at them. Unfortunately, you have to ask those people, can you bring me your transcript? And many times you have those transcript there with those when you're unsure. What does the CFR say? You have to have 2 years. If you qualify as a technical consultant, you got to have 2 years of training experience in the laboratory. So if you're a journalist, that usually covers all of the micro, hematology, UA, and chemistry. If you work in all of them, coag included, okay, that covers that. You have that experience covers. Remember though, for MOTs, it has to be 4 years of experience. Not only that, whereas in the bachelor's degree, they let you have one in chemical, physical, biological science and all of that, and medical laboratory. Or for an associate's degree, their associate's degree must be specifically in clinical laboratory science only. They cannot have an associate's degree in business and then say that. It has to be specific for those people with those type of degrees. I'm sorry, I told you all I get on my pedestal here when we talk about that, so I apologize. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I have my email up here a second ago, or definitely go to Lab Simplify blog. It's there. Again, I want to thank Lab Simplify for asking me to do this. We're always happy. They're going to have some more educational seminars. One great thing I've seen with Lab Simplify, they have a PT tracking. Those of you who have, especially for big labs, sign of those PTs and all of that, that is a great module. They showed it to me, so you might want to check them out for that. But thank you, and thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Dr. Elzie. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights with us. So we need to wrap up here, and thank you, all of you, for joining the webinar today. And I hope you found this webinar session helpful. And like Dr. Elzie said, if you have any questions, you can email him in the email address. And also go to our blogs. There's a comment section there. And we regularly follow our comment section. If you have any question regarding the competency assessments, please, you can post your question there, and we'll try to answer that. Again, thank you so much. And I will send all the details on the webinar recording on how to access them in your inbox. So watch out for your inbox soon. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thank you, Subhash. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.